Brexit means Brexit and the UK must make a success of it, says the Prime Minister as she holds talks with the Cabinet. Theresa May is meeting Cabinet colleagues for the first time since the summer break to discuss an action plan for leaving the EU.
We'll be looking at the next steps that we need to take, but we'll also be looking at the opportunities that are now open to us.
She told the Cabinet there are challenges ahead, and she confirmed she's ruled out a second referendum, also this lunchtime. More than 10,000 people have been rescued off the coast of Libya since Sunday. Many of them are being brought ashore now in Sicily. A Polish man murdered in Essex at the weekend. Police suspect it may have been a racist attack. There's been a shocking increase in discrimination against new and expectant mothers at work, according to MPs. And splashing out on Premier League players, the £1 billion bonanza as clubs set a new summer transfer record.
In the south, talks begin in a bid to stop a strike by platform staff on Southern Railway, but a guards' walkout will go ahead. And jailed for life, the Dorset paedophile who filmed himself abusing children in the Philippines.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Brexit means Brexit. That's what the Prime Minister has told her Cabinet at their first meeting since the summer break. She's holding talks at her country retreat, Chequers, to discuss how and when the UK will exit the European Union. Theresa May confirmed there will be no second referendum on Britain's exit from the EU, and she has challenged each member of the Cabinet to identify the opportunities Brexit will create in their department, telling them they will make a success of it. Our political correspondent Chris Mason reports.
The British people have spoken and the answer is we're out.
It was the moment that cost David Cameron his job and propelled Theresa May into Downing Street. Now, a few months on, the challenge of delivering Brexit. Who gets to have an away day at a place like this? Well, the Cabinet. This is Chequers, the Prime Minister's place in the country.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming together today. It's our first opportunity to meet.
Summer holidays over, it's back to work. Mrs May says there's lots for the government to be getting on with, but one thing dominates.
We will have an update on Brexit. We'll be looking at the next steps that we need to take, but we'll also be looking at the opportunities that are now open to us as we forge a new role for the UK in the world.
The tricky trade-off here is being seen to deal with people's concerns about immigration, whilst also ensuring that British businesses can trade as freely as possible with our nearest neighbours. Speak to people in Parliament and you get a real sense of how difficult that balancing act will prove to be. This Conservative MP campaigned for us to leave and says cutting immigration is essential.
I think the important thing that we have to emphasise is the fact that freedom of movement is an issue. We have to have some concession on freedom of movement. It's not right that people can just simply come to Britain on spec, waving their EU passport and without a job.
But scroll along to another Tory MP and you find a rather different view.
Without the free movement of labour, British industry would not be able to perform in the way it does. All the way through to food processing company in my constituency, which employs about 250 people, that relies heavily on EU workers, right the way through to highly skilled. Our NHS, for example, depends on EU workers and migrant workers.
The will of the people in the EU referendum was clear. Delivering it is the challenge that will dominate politics for years. Chris Mason, BBC News.
Our political correspondent Glenn Campbell is at Chequers. And will we get any sense of the beginnings of an action plan by the end of today?
I can't promise that we will know much more by the end of today when Cabinet Ministers leave Chequers. We're now more than 2 months on from that vote to leave the European Union, and what is striking, Sophie, is how little we actually do know about what Brexit will mean in practice. That's partly because neither the Leave or Remain camps in the EU referendum campaign seem to have done much, if any, planning. There is no Brexit blueprint, and we've had something approaching a summer of silence on this from the government. Theresa May broke that at the start of today's cabinet meeting. She said that much work had been done in recent weeks, but beyond that, there wasn't much from her that was new. She repeated her catchphrase, Brexit means Brexit, in that she's not seeking to remain in the EU, not seeking to rejoin it by the back door, and not seeking to have another referendum. But she's yet to set out in any detail what form of relationship with the EU she's seeking for the UK.
Glenn Campbell, thank you. More than 10,000 people have been rescued from the Mediterranean since Sunday by Italian coastguards after calmer seas led to a surge in the number of people attempting the dangerous journey from Libya to Europe by boat. Many of the migrants are from Eritrea and Somalia. They'll be brought ashore in Sicily, as Richard Galpin reports.
A warship arriving in Sicily after the long voyage across the Mediterranean from North Africa. On board, the first of thousands of refugees and migrants who've been rescued this week after being found drifting in flimsy boats off the Libyan coast. After days at sea, there's relief to be back on dry land. They have survived. And amongst this first group are many of the most vulnerable.
We have seen many women with very young babies. They mostly come from sub-Saharan Africa, from Gambia, Nigeria and Ghana. And yesterday 140 unaccompanied children arrived in another port, Trapani, amongst them a big group from Somalia.
The women and children are given priority as they come off the ship. They'll have health checks and will be identified before being sent to migrant camps around Italy. Back on the other side of the Mediterranean off the coast of Libya, international rescue teams are still hard at work, saving thousands more refugees and migrants adrift in boats which are far too flimsy to reach Italy. The current spell of good weather tempting many to set sail, and the smugglers apparently not telling them just how far it is to the Italian coast. And still, large numbers of migrants and refugees from across Africa continue to arrive in Libya in the hope they'll find a boat to take them to Europe. This group was caught by Libyan security forces in the desert. But there are very serious concerns about how migrants detained in Libya are being treated by some of the militias.
The militia are no friend of the migrants. They're exploitative. They're milking them as a kind of a harvest that comes through. Any who have mobile phones with connections abroad, they will have them call those people, possibly torture them, and demand that money gets sent to them via some mobile transfer thing like PayPal.
And fear of mistreatment once they arrive in Libya is yet another reason why so many migrants and refugees want to get on the boats to Europe as quickly as possible. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
Well, the operation in the Mediterranean is one of the biggest rescue missions this year. Our Middle East correspondent Quentin Somerville has been talking to a 19-year-old from Gambia who tried more than once to cross the sea and get to Germany about what life has been like for him since he left Africa.
It's a powerful thing, the promise of Europe. It's brought 1 million across the Mediterranean, and it's still casting thousands to their death. In a sea of faces making the dangerous journey from Libya, some stand out. Last April, I met Mohammed from Gambia.
Me, I have been here about 2 years now, trying to go to Italy. This is the 4th time I'm trying to go. All the 3 times, they get me back. It's my chance to get back to the world, because we can say Europe is better than Africa.
Everyone on the quayside that day was thrown in jail, but not Mohammed. He gave the authorities the slip and was back stacking vegetables again in Tripoli. Months later, we went looking for him. Do you know where he is now?
He just called me from Italy. He says he's going straight to Germany.
And that's where we caught up with him, far from Tripoli, in the small German town of Biberach an der Riss. To get here, he paid a people smuggler the last of his savings, £500 for one last crossing.
I take the boat again. We went and we were lost. And we have to go back again. Nearly 2 days we are in water. And the same month, I took it again. That was the 5th time and then 8th time in Italy.
That was September?
I didn't believe. I said, oh my God, this is just amazing.
This journey took stamina, courage and nearly 2 years. He's now learning German and competing in long-distance running. But for some of his friends, they made it from Libya to Europe in only 2 weeks. Just look at this. Compared to Libya, it's paradise. And for Mohammed and others, Europe hasn't suddenly become more attractive. It's just that smuggling has become more organised and it's unhindered. So if you're determined, as Mohammed was, and you're prepared to risk your life, getting here is straightforward.
Young Gambians, I can advise them not to take the journey because it's not safe. But if I say that, as I'm saying that, they will say I'm selfish. I am here and I don't want them to come. Hello.
His determination is exceptional, but his story isn't. In the time Mohammed's been here, more than 250,000 have made the same crossing, and more than 3,000 have died. Mohammed, though, has won his right to stay. Quentin Somerville, BBC News in southern Germany.
Police in Essex are being given powers to stop people congregating outside a row of shops where a Polish man was killed in a possible hate crime. The 40-year-old man, named locally as Arkadiusz Juszczyk, died of head injuries. A second Polish man was injured. 6 teenagers have been arrested and bailed on suspicion of murder. Gareth George is in Harlow for us now.
Well, I'm at the Stowe shopping centre in Harlow, and just a few minutes ago a delegation arrived here from the Polish embassy. The Polish ambassador stood in silence as he looked at some of the floral tributes that have been placed here. He laid some flowers himself and stood in silence reading the messages that have been left. Now the flowers are for a 40-year-old factory worker who's known to his friends as Arek Jozwik. He had ordered a takeaway pizza here on Saturday evening. He was sitting eating his pizza, chatting to a friend, when police say he was targeted by a group of teenagers. He and his friend were assaulted. Arek Jozwik suffered serious head injuries. He later died at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge. The Kent and Essex Serious Crime Directorate launched a murder investigation, and they say they're treating this as a potential hate crime. And what's caused huge dismay here is the age of those who've been arrested in connection with this attack. 6 teenagers, 5 aged 15, 1 aged 16. They were arrested on suspicion of murder. They've since been released on bail. Earlier, the Polish ambassador, who's now giving a statement to the media, issued a comment, and he said, "We have been shocked by the murder of a Polish national in Harlow. One of the lines of investigation is that it's a hate crime, and we call on all witnesses to report to the police." And Essex police are reiterating their appeal for witnesses. They want anyone who knows anything about this attack to come forward.
Gareth George, thank you. Pregnant women and new mums need more protection at work. That's according to a group of MPs who say there has been a shocking increase in discrimination. The Women and Equalities Committee says the number of expectant and new mothers forced to leave their jobs has almost doubled to 54,000 a year since 2005. Emma Simpson reports.
Bang, bang, bang. Jolie is a mum and now a campaigner. That's because she was sacked by voicemail after telling her employer she was 4 months pregnant. She was on a fixed-term contract to complete a project for a charity.
It was really upsetting that somebody would treat me like that when I felt I was at my most vulnerable, and I had done nothing to deserve it. I was going to do everything I could to ensure there were no problems for the company, and I needed them to support me and work with me, not sack me.
Pregnant women and new mothers now face more discrimination at work than they did a decade ago. In the largest survey of its kind last year, the Equality and Human Rights Commission found that more than 1 in 10 women had been dismissed, made redundant, or treated so badly they had to leave their jobs.
It's bad for women, it's bad for the families involved, but it's also bad for businesses as well when we have record numbers of women in work and we need those women to be productive members of our economy.
What to do about it? The MPs want to see a German-style system where pregnant and new mums can only be dismissed in exceptional circumstances with official approval. They also want a substantial cut to the cost of bringing discrimination cases to an employment tribunal. And they want paid time off for antenatal appointments for casual, agency and zero-hours workers. Becoming a mum is a life-changing moment, so why, after 30 years of having legal protections, are things getting worse?
Culture and behaviour and attitudes are right at the heart of it. Our research found 54,000 women are forced out of work every year. The vast majority of those leave because the workplace is unbearable for them.
Jack, look at this. For Jolie and many other women, today's recommendations are welcome. The government will look at them, but will all employers take note? Emma Simpson, BBC News.
The US presidential candidate Donald Trump, who has described Mexican immigrants as drug dealers and rapists, is making an unexpected trip to Mexico today to meet the country's president. Mr. Trump, who has repeatedly criticised Mexico during his campaign and pledged to build a wall along the border, accepted an invitation for private talks. Andy Moore reports.
Some say Trump is softening his stance on the wall. This was his latest statement on the issue.
We are also going to secure our border and stop the drugs from pouring in and destroying our country.
We're gonna build the wall, folks. Don't worry about it.
In the past, his determination to build a wall paid for by Mexico has got the crowds going. He said it was needed to keep out undesirables.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
Not surprisingly, the reaction from Mexico has been frosty, to say the least. The president said Trump's rhetoric was dangerous. That's how Mussolini got in, he said. That's how Hitler got in. They took advantage of a situation after an economic crisis. There's already a barrier along part of the Mexican border. This is near Tijuana. One former Mexican president said it was ridiculous to try to force Mexico to pay for an extension right along the frontier.
Is Trump going to steal that money? Take it away from them, as he's saying? How can any human being think like that? It's incredible. So it will not happen. Forget it.
After his meeting in Mexico, Mr. Trump will be giving another big speech. Its subject, immigration. Andy Moore, BBC News.
The time is coming up to 1:20 our top story this lunchtime. The Prime Minister tells the Cabinet there'll be no second referendum and no attempts to stay in the EU by the back door. And how these household gadgets and machinery could revolutionise the way we use electricity.
In South today, inside Sonning, has the Berkshire village changed now that one of its residents is running the country? And don't be shy, two little leopards come out to play for the first time. We're live at Marwell Zoo to meet the cubs.
There's been an outbreak of the Zika virus in Singapore with more than 80 confirmed cases. Now all pregnant women showing symptoms are being urged to undergo tests. Zika generally has mild effects but poses a risk to pregnant women because it is thought to cause severe birth defects. From Singapore, Sharanjit Lail reports.
The battle against Zika is manual work. Door to door, hundreds of inspectors search for the mosquitoes which carry the virus. Chin Bee Fong is one of those on the front line. She's from Singapore's National Environment Agency.
What Bee Fong is doing here, coming into homes like these across the island, is crucial in combating Zika. Getting to the virus at its source, trying to kill the larvae of the Aedes mosquito and eradicate potential breeding grounds.
Melvin Chua's flat is just one of 5,000 premises which have been checked. Singapore's laws are strict. If larvae are found, residents can be fined or even jailed. But Melvin's home has been given the all clear. It's not just the Environment Agency ensuring a mosquito-free zone. Singapore's government too is here to inspect the inspections.
All of us need to be concerned and we need to join in this collective effort to, as a community, to take the necessary precautions to keep ourselves safe, protect ourselves, as well as watch out for others, including the pregnant woman. And the best way to do this really is to prevent mosquito breeding.
Women like Agnes Tan are now being offered free tests for Zika if they have symptoms. She works less than a mile away from the outbreak and her baby is due in October.
I make it a point to take good care of myself and make sure I avoid crowded places, as well as make sure if I spot any symptoms or having a fever, I'll reach out to the doctors. Yeah.
Singapore's urban density and its role as a major transit hub for the region is raising concerns about the speed at which Zika may spread. This is already one of the largest outbreaks in Southeast Asia. So far, there have been no cases of microcephaly here, but the fear is that the condition, which has affected thousands in Brazil, may appear here in Singapore unless this fight continues. Sharonjit Leo, BBC News, Singapore.
The Crown Prosecution Service has confirmed that the decision not to bring charges against Sir Cliff Richard will be reviewed after one of the singer's alleged victims asked for the case to be reconsidered under the Victims' Right of Review scheme. The 75-year-old was never arrested or charged following an investigation by South Yorkshire Police, and his case was discontinued by the CPS in June on the grounds of insufficient evidence. The review is expected to be completed by the end of September. The so-called Islamic State group says one of its senior commanders has been killed in Syria. Abu Muhammad al-Adnani, who led the militants' propaganda campaign, had called for lone wolf attacks on Western countries, including France. The Pentagon has confirmed that it targeted him during an airstrike yesterday in Aleppo province. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner reports.
The public face and the noisy voice of IS, now silenced. Abu Muhammad al-Adnani was targeted by US airstrikes in Syria. Today, Russia's defense ministry says its forces killed him. Al-Adnani was IS's chief strategist as well as its public face. He was a social media pioneer, uploading countless hate-filled messages, and he continually called for lone wolf attacks on IS's enemies around the world. That call appears to have been answered. Attacks like this lorry driver in Nice, crushing dozens of people to death last month, have been linked back to al-Adnani. So too the wave of violence unleashed during the month of Ramadan, like this attack on Istanbul airport. It followed his call to step up attacks during the Muslim holy month of fasting. IS says al-Adnani was killed while surveying the fighting around Aleppo, where the group has been losing ground. IS is now on the back foot militarily in Syria, Iraq and Libya. So what difference, if any, will al-Adnani's death make?
Adnani is instrumental to ISIS, and we have to remember that because Adnani is a member of an older generation who understands strategy and knows exactly the direction the organisation is going. And so losing Adnani will need a huge replacement to fill that void that ISIS have now lost.
Islamic State and its ideology will go on. A successor will be found, and terrorist attacks around the world won't suddenly stop. But the loss of Abu Muhammad al-Adnani will further weaken IS and, just possibly, hasten its eventual demise. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
The British Medical Association is due to meet later today to discuss the next steps in the junior doctors dispute. In July, the government announced it would impose a new contract after junior doctors in England voted to reject a revised deal which had been brokered by the BMA. Our health correspondent Jane Draper is with me, so this means more strike action looming.
It could well be. The meeting's due to begin soon and we'll have the results later today. If the BMA Council goes for further strikes, they could well agree to longer strikes, possibly ones as long as 5 days, beginning in the coming weeks. And if that happens, that would represent a significant ramping up of this long-running bitter dispute. Remember, we've already had 6 strikes in England so far this year, and that includes the first all-out stoppages in the history of the NHS. Now, there are some really divided views within the BMA Council in this trade union. Some senior doctors feel really uncomfortable with the idea of further strikes. Others feel they have to support their junior colleagues. Among the junior doctors themselves, 58% of those who voted rejected the new contract last month. It's due to be imposed in England from October, but there are still significant concerns among junior doctors about how weekends are paid, how part-timers are paid, and they say government services, the plans for 7-day services are understaffed and underfunded. But NHS employers have already warned that any further industrial action would achieve little or nothing and just simply stretch services further. The Patients Association says any idea of longer strikes would have a huge impact on patients and the public.
Jane, thank you. The Brazilian Senate will vote later today on whether to impeach President Dilma Rousseff and remove her permanently from office. She stands accused of masking the country's economic problems by tampering with the budget. In Japan, at least 9 people have been found dead in an old people's home that was overcome by floodwaters. The flooding was caused by Typhoon Lionrock, which swept across northern Japan late last night. In some areas, half a metre of rain has fallen, causing rivers to burst their banks. A United Airlines passenger jet was forced to land in the Irish Republic after flying through extreme turbulence. 12 people, 3 of them children, had to be treated in hospital for minor injuries. Now, for the first time ever, Premier League clubs have spent more than £1 billion in a single transfer window. The deadline for transfers is 11 o'clock tonight. Our sports correspondent David Ornstein joins us now from the BBC's Sports Centre. What a lot of money.
Sophie, it's an extraordinary amount of money. If you think last year, £870 million was spent in the summer window, and that was a record. But this year, that record was broken with almost a week to spare. The headline act probably Paul Pogba leaving Juventus for Manchester United for £89 million. John Stones becoming the most expensive English defender in history, leaving Everton for Manchester City for almost £50 million. And why is this happening? Well, the new television broadcast contracts, which are earning the Premier League clubs about £8 million split between the 20 clubs, and that has changed everything. Now, some of the money has been reinvested in the Premier League, but over half of it has gone to overseas clubs and also the Football League. And the result is that today, on deadline day, we're seeing a lot of loan deals because players, high-profile players, are finding themselves surplus to requirements at clubs. 2 of them are England internationals. Joe Hart joining Torino in Italy, and also Jack Wilshere of Arsenal possibly on his way to AS Roma. So lots more money will be spent before the deadline closes at 11 p.m. tonight. Lots of business to be done on this unprecedented transfer window.
Indeed. David, thank you. Flexible electricity, that is the future, according to the people who run the UK's national grid. They say a smart energy revolution has already begun here. What does it all mean? Our environment analyst, Roger Harrabin, has been finding out.
Today's kitchens are dumb. Your fridge and freezer are insulated, but they use electricity all the time. Washing machines often use power when demand is peaking on the grid. The kitchen of the future will be a smart kitchen, with appliances connected to the Internet of Energy. In future, the Internet of Energy will contact your fridge and say, there's going to be a bit of a peak in demand on the grid. Do you mind if we turn you off for a few minutes? Your fridge or your freezer will say, I'm well insulated, that's fine, go ahead. The same's true for your washing machine and tumble dryer. When there's plentiful energy on the web, when the wind's blowing, say, the web will contact your tumble dryer and say, cheap energy, do you fancy some? And your tumble dryer will say, yeah baby, turn me on. The growth in wind energy is driving the need for more flexible power use. Wind energy is virtually free when the wind blows, but it doesn't blow all the time. Aggregate industries near Heathrow are helping fill the resulting energy gaps. Tanks of bitumen here for building roads are heated by electricity, and when there's a grid shortage, a computer asks the firm to turn off the heaters. The bitumen stays hot so it doesn't affect their business, and the firm gets paid for doing it.
I think this is a no-brainer for us and for industry really, because we're turning our equipment off and we're saving energy. We're not generating carbon whilst it's off, and we're making an income stream as well for allowing our assets to be used flexibly.
More firms like this are needed to volunteer to make the smart energy revolution a reality. If it happens, we'll save pollution, save building new power stations, and save money. Roger Harrabin, BBC News.
And finally, if you're scared of heights, you may not want to watch this, because this is professional unicyclist Flaviu Cinescu, who's riding on top of a chimney that is 250 metres high. This is in Romania. It's one of the tallest structures there. Doesn't look like he has much safety equipment around him. Needless to say, not one that you should ever try at home. Oh, I have to look away. Let's have a look at the weather now with Stav Daneos. Hi.
Hi there, Sophie. Thank you very much. I'll show you the satellite picture to begin the forecast. We've got a lot of sunshine across the southeast, and the sunshine's helped temperatures rise to 24 degrees in East Anglia. But that finger of cloud you can see through central areas is a weak weather front. It's continuing to sink southwards and eastwards. Barely any rain on it, but it means it'll start turning cloudier across the East Midlands and the southeast as the afternoon wears on. So probably temperatures tapering off a bit. But behind it, it brightens up too. There'll be plenty of sunshine for the rest of England, for Wales, and a scattering of showers with quite a breeze continuing for western Scotland. And there's the temperatures by the time we reach the latter part of the afternoon. Then the showers begin to ease down this evening across Scotland. Then overnight, most places actually having quite a dry, clear night with not much really to talk about. It will be quite a chilly one, though, because the winds will be light for England and Wales, so we could see some mist and fog patches developing. So it means we start Thursday off on a fairly cool note, but at least bright with some sunshine, the mist and fog clearing away. Most of the country actually having a fine, usable day, lovely to be out and about. But you'll notice rain starts piling into Northern Ireland, much of Scotland, in towards northwest England, and the wind too. So high teens Celsius here, but again, we could make the mid-20s Celsius in the southeast. Now, that weather front across the northwest begins to sink southwards and eastwards again during Thursday night, and much like this one today is doing, is fizzling out as it reaches the southeast. So looks like there'll be more cloud with the odd spot of rain around southern and eastern areas through Friday afternoon, whereas again it brightens up behind it. Now, as we head on towards the weekend, quite a lot going on. It looks like it's going to be unsettled for many with outbreaks of rain, but it's not going to be a washout for all. And it's this area of low pressure which comes hurtling in off the Atlantic, which threatens to bring quite a wet day for some on Saturday. Now, initially it's a nice start with some sunshine around, and then it turns much wetter, windier across western areas. It looks like it'll be affecting central northern parts of the UK, but there is some uncertainty with its position, certainly the timing of this system. It looks like for Sunday it will clear away to allow for some brighter conditions to move in its place before the next weather system you can see behind me moves in later on Sunday. Now, just to take your attention to the central Atlantic, where you probably heard Hurricane Gaston is swirling out there, quite a powerful storm, Category 3. It looks like it'll begin to decay as we reach the latter part of the week and remain out in open waters. It won't affect our weather. But something a bit more interesting going on across the United States. This system, Tropical Depression 9 in the Gulf of Mexico, is likely to develop into a tropical storm today, and it's going to move across the Florida Panhandle as we head through the week to bring some very heavy rain, risk of flooding and some storm surges.
Stav, thank you. A reminder now of our main story this lunchtime. Brexit means Brexit, and the UK must make a success of it, says the Prime Minister as she holds her first talks with the Cabinet since the summer break. That's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Bye-bye.